Right, when I'd say we're ready to kick off, there's Macroom time for first year. We'll give you a talk this evening on Massytown by Marcella Ní Chríodáin, who was my first cousin's daughter. And she's going to talk and give a forward formation of Massytown, where it came from and what is at the moment. And I hope you enjoy it. And roughly about 45-50 minutes, Marcella, is it?
Yeah. And
then we're open to questions and whatever else happens after that. Hope you enjoy it.
So, as Joe said, my name is Marcella. I was born and raised in Massytown, though I haven't lived there for quite a long time. And my family go back to, at the very least, my great-great-grandparents. So when I decided to do a talk for the history group, it kind of seemed like the most natural place to start. So I decided to go hunting for the beginnings of Massytown. So I started looking at old maps, and it led me to this map. So this is the Down map. This map comes from 1655 to between 1655 and 1658. It was done as part of Cromwell's conquest of Ireland. It's not really to scale, it's not really laid out. You can kind of see where Clondrohid is compared to Macroom, which is Macroom. It's a bit funky, but you know, for the time it was made, we'll go with it. The McCarthys are still in charge of Muskerry this time. They're in Macroom Castle, and they would have owned large swathes of Muskerry. And at this point on this map, there's no mention of Massytown yet. So if we just zoom in a little bit here. So if I can get the pointer working on this. So you can see different townlands that make up Massytown though. So up here is Gertine Row. So that's on Gertine Rua, which would be the small red field. There's Kilnagertine below it, which is the little wood, or some people say Kill means church, but in this context, I think it's probably wood, because at this point there's no mention of a church. There's never been any talk of a church, there's no ruins of a church. It definitely seems like it's a wood rather than church. Then there's down here, the most important bit, Margarine on Macroom. So this is the small plain, and already at this point, there's 2 mills in Macroom. And this really is, I think, the beginnings of Massytown, and I mean, it really points to a super ancient tradition of milling in the area. Over to the left of it here is East and West Levine. This is the settlement of Macroom. You can see they've kind of little images of homes, I guess. And then not on the map, but I thought I would include, is Coolihan or Coolihan, which would be Lehan's Corner. It's not on the map. Possibly it's too small. Maybe it doesn't exist yet. But I thought it was kind of an important part of Massytown. So eventually the land moves out of Irish hands, and it seems to have been owned by the Hutchinsons and eventually the Masseys. So that's where I went next, because I assumed Mount Massey House and the Masseys, that was the namesake of Massytown. So I went searching for the Masseys. So this is Mount Massey House, which is now a ruin, but that's a contemporary image of it, and you can see like it was stunning. So this is the Massey family. So the Masseys began with Captain Hugh Massey I. This is this fellow over here. So he was born in Cheshire in the 17th century, and he fought for Cromwell in the conquest and was given lands in Limerick as a reward, and he was made a baron. So his descendants, you come way down, like through the family tree, through a load of Masseys, and you get to Hugh Massey, and this is Baron Massey's descendant. Hugh is not a lord, he's not a baron, he's just a branch of the Massey family. So Hugh is born in Limerick, and he is the first Massey in Massytown, but he is not the namesake of Massytown. In reality, it's his father-in-law who is the founder and the namesake of Massytown. So Hugh gets married to a girl called Alice. She's a widow and she's an heiress, and her father is Massey Hutchinson. And Massey Hutchinson is from Coldrum House, of the Coldrum Hutchinsons, who would be a family that remained in Coldrum House for quite a long time. And Alice's father, Massey, in 1776 is granted the fairs and markets of Kilnagertine alias Massytown. That's written in an official document called Massytown, and that's showing the fairs and things being granted to Massey Hutchinson. And that really is, to me anyway, the beginning of Massytown, when it's been called Massytown, when the fairs are running, and that's where the namesake comes from. It doesn't come from the Massey family at all, it comes from the Hutchinson family. So we know there's already 2 mills running. The Hutchinsons have an older house on the site of Mount Massey, and people have already started populating the area. Massey Hutchinson then built the house that still stands, so Mount Massey House, in 1783, where there was an older house. Massey Hutchinson's mother was Hannah Massey. Now, which Massey family or the branch of the Massey she came from, I didn't really go running for. I feel like there's so many bloody Masseys in this story already. But she was his namesake. You'll see these families, they constantly use surnames as first names, and it gets really confusing, and you don't know which Massey you're talking about because they all have the same mix of names. But anyway, her and her son basically built Mount Massey House, and there is a foundation stone in the house that says, Mrs. Hannah Hutchinson, otherwise Massey, mother to Massey Hutchinson Esquire, laid the foundation stone of this building May 1st, 1783. And that was Mount Massey House. So Alice passes away, and her inheritance of the house and the lands is inherited by her son, Massey Hutchinson Massey. He's quite young when she dies. And Hugh and his son, Massey Hutchinson Massey, moved to Mount Massey in the early 19th century. So they don't actually come to Massytown until the early 19th century. And this is the beginning of the Masseys in Massytown. So Massey Hutchinson Massey marries Sarah Davies, and they are running the estate during the famine. This Massey doesn't seem like a nice guy. In 1832, there's a letter signed by 30 inhabitants of the parish of Ballyvorney, and I'm going to quote a part of it. So it is objecting to the unbecoming behaviour exhibited by Massey H. Massey, magistrate of Mount Massey, at a recent tithe sale, and seeking to have him removed from the commission of the peace, claiming that Massey purchased hay that was seized in lieu of tithes, and immediately set fire to it in an act which was intended to provoke agitation. So Massey and some of his fellow magistrates, Richard Ashe and Reverend Richard Davis, basically, so the tithes were, you paid them to the Church of Ireland, whether you were Protestant or not, you had no choice in the matter. And during the tithe war, which would have been happening at this point, people started to refuse to pay their tithes, and things would have been pretty tense. So the hay was seized from someone who couldn't or wouldn't pay their tithes, and Massey and his buddies basically gave the finger to those who wouldn't pay by burning the hay in front of them. This same Massey is in prison in 1851 as a debtor, and it seems to me at this point, because of the famine, the estate is probably in trouble. Their son, William, inherits an estate that is probably definitely in trouble. William himself is quite a notorious landlord. There are stories absolutely abound, if you go looking for them, about William, and in particular William and the Hunt. The stories all tell of Massey, the cruel and great tyrant. He kept some great greyhounds for coursing on his property, but tenants were not allowed to keep a dog or even a cat. If one of his gamekeepers told him that a tenant had a cat, you would have to pay an extra half year's rent just because of the cat. There was no dog allowed to hunt on Massey lands besides his own greyhounds. The Masseys actually, incidentally, did have great success with greyhounds, and greyhounds were always a feature of Massytown, even as I grew up, and I do wonder if it started with the Masseys themselves. In one part of Massey's property in Cashlora, he had a grand house built for his gamekeeper. The gamekeeper's name was Daniel Lucy, or Lusheen. So Lusheen wasn't particularly liked. He got shot at one stage, and he got police protection. There was obvious tension. So this is the poor old attack on Lusheen down here. So let me zoom in. Oh, wrong button. Sorry, I can't see it. So you can see here he's already under police protection, and some lads broke in, which I think kind of speaks to how people felt about him. So Massey advertised in the paper, this is the advertisement, that a reward was going to be given for the detection of any man hunting in his lands. He particularly says here, if any unlicensed or obnoxious person be detected, £20 will be given. So the Do Hollow Hunt decided to respond to this challenge, and they actually put out their own advert. And I actually think it's kind of hilarious. So Do Hollow National Coursing Club, next meeting at Mom across between Kilcorny and Macroom on Sunday the 27th of September. All hunting parties to be at the rendezvous with dog at 10 o'clock sharp. Men of Muskerry and Do Hollow who are anxious to earn £10 easily from Mr. Massey are expected to be present, and obnoxious parties should especially attend, as according to the terms of Mr. Hutchinson's Massey kind offer, they will get £20 each. I just think it's absolutely hilarious that this went out, and I think it really shows how much people did not like the Masseys. So As the story goes, early in the day, there was the sounds of horns, and a crowd of men and hounds were seen at Mama Cross. So this is, we'd say, up past St. John's Well, up the top of Massytown, or like out past Massytown. There was also a wagonette, and in it were two priests. There was Father Toomey of Ballyvorney and Father O'Riordan of Bantier. The roads were apparently lined with police from Mama all the way down to Massytown, but they were unable to stop the hunt. They let the hounds loose into Malnahora and Cashlura. They passed by poor old Lucine's lodge. Everybody joined in, and they went in the direction of Macroom, where the wagonette was waiting at the end of the avenue leading to the Great House. There was such a crowd of people present that a turnip field near Massy's house was full of rabbits, and the crowd pulled every turnip in the field and threw them after the rabbits. They decorated the wagon with dead hares, dead rabbits, and they marched singing and cheering through the domain to the hall door, and apparently there was over 3,000 people, all between 10 and 80 years of age, when they reached Mount Massy. Massy himself stood at the hall door and thought the people were mad. I mean, yeah. And about 200 horsemen surrounded the house, demanded the reward, and apparently the Massy family were never so powerful after that challenge, and the day broke poor Massy's heart. So I just think, and the fact that this is all recorded in the newspapers, you know, the story, I had heard the story was told, and then when I went looking, it's all there, the proof that this absolutely happened. So this William Massy ends up in trouble, and the estate actually ends up for sale in 1861. So on the left here is the poster. This is the Encumbered Estates Act, so these would be estates that had run into debt. So in these lots, we see the sale of the Fairfield. You can see down here, so Mount Massy, the Fairfield, the Fairs and Tolls of Massytown, and Massytown are all up for sale. The sale didn't actually go ahead. An advert was put out saying most things had been sold privately, and I do think that Massy's managed to hold on to a bit of it, but it does show that things weren't great. Some are also bought by Protestant landlords. You start to see the Hedges appearing in the title deeds, who were another landlord family in Macroom. But if we go into this, so this is one of the lots. This is for the house itself. And I think there's some interesting things in here if I can zoom in. So first of all, you can see like the rents, the size of the lot. This is just for the house itself and the domain of the house. But down here, you can see that already in 1859, the lot is in a fee farm grant to the Right Honourable Earl of Bandon. So basically, all that means is it's like a rent. So the Earl of Bandon technically, it's really complicated, I don't really understand property law, but technically the Earl of Bandon owns the land and Massy's paying him a rent, but Massy can still pass the land on to his children, still farms it, still takes all the money from it, just pays this £48 rent twice a year to the Earl of Bandon. I wonder, was that done in some way to try and hold on to the land as the famine really bit into their money. Also, what I think is interesting is there is a covenant not to demise, let or assign the premises to or in trust for any papist, which is a nice little detail.
Common enough. It is common enough in most Africa today.
Yeah, but it's just yeah, I think it tells a lot about people. Then the next one, if I can get back out. This is just the descriptive particulars. Again, a little interesting thing is the town of Massytown. Down here in the description for the sale of the town of Massytown talks of the railway coming to Macroom, and at one point one of the lines being discussed is the North Line, which would be, the terminus would be in all probability be in Massytown, greatly to its benefit. And I wonder how Massytown would have changed if the train had actually come to Massytown instead of the other end of town. So, and this is the most interesting bit, these are the lots of Massytown. These are the people living in the houses at the time of the sale, their rents, their leases, what they're paying, their terms of their lease. Some of the interesting ones are, I mean, some poor tenants are tenant from year to year, so I mean, Massy wants you out, it's quite easy to get you out. Some of the more interesting tenants are things like 61 years. Again, if you want to look at the names as well, these are the people who are living in Massytown, and some of these names, I mean, still live in Massytown now, or up until recently. So 61 years is one. For the 3 lives, you know, some of them are the lives of the Prince of Wales would be the length of your tenancy. It's just quite interesting to read through, especially if you're doing genealogy and things and you're kind of interested in where you come from. These sorts of documents are incredible, I think. So I won't go through the whole thing, but you can see all the names: Waltons, Nevilles, Desmonds, and again all the different types of leases, like year to year. All that I think is super interesting. Okay. So what's left of the estate eventually passes from Elizabeth Massey here to her second son, John Borlase Warren Massey. So Elizabeth has passed on an even smaller estate again. It's worth just about £3,900 to John. She came up against tenants who are starting to demand better rights for themselves. I'm not going to read it, but this is an article about tenants organising to stand up to Mrs. Massey, who wants to evict 40 tenants in one go, which is a pretty terrible thing to do. But I think, again, what's kind of interesting is the Carriganimma police were lulled into a sense of security by the clever tactics of the local, local secretary, of the League, and remained in blissful ignorance of the meeting until they saw the members trooping down in vast numbers to the village of Carriganimma. So they obviously tried to keep it secret and managed to do so until the night of the meeting. John himself, this guy, is living in the lodge, and his older brother, William Hugh Hutchinson Massey, or Hugh, is living in town. He's living as a boarder in the middle square. Both brothers are drunks. They're not particularly living a good life. William Hugh Hutchinson Massey marries a Catholic woman in 1896, Nora. In 1897, they have a son, and in 1898, she has left him and taken his son, who they had agreed to raise as Protestant. Her divorce petition can actually be viewed, and it really reveals the abuse she suffered at his hands. There is a battle over the child, but by 1901, he is living as a boarder in the square. There's no son with him, and in 1907, he dies, and he leaves just £100 to his brother John. So John, known as JB or Jack, is known for being a pretty generous drunk, with his friends following him around from pub to pub in the hopes of a free round. He is well known to the police in the town. He has various run-ins, and if you search for him in the newspaper archives, lots of stuff pops up about his run-ins with people, and people in Massytown had plenty run-ins with him. He's in prison in 1909 for, it just says wounding. I don't know what he did, but it doesn't sound great. He sells the house and the domain of the house and is living in the lodge, and he dies in August 1931, and is apparently buried in Macroom, though I haven't been able to pin down exactly where. So that's the Masseys. But any place, Massytown included, is made by its people. They may have gathered there because of the Hutchinson and Massey landlords, but Massytown was built by the Irish people who lived and made their lives there. So this is a map of Massytown from between 1829 and 1841. So it's not the greatest quality now. I don't know how much you can see, but you can see there's the mill here. There's another mill here. They're pointed as corn and flour mills. This is like Massytown itself, and these are the houses. So the mill dam starts here, and the barracks and things are down here. Sunnyside House isn't there yet. Neither is Massytown House. There's a tan yard down here, and there's another tan yard here. This is what would eventually become O'Connor Park. You can see there's a little mill pond there, which would be supplying the mills. The house is up here, Massytown, or Mount Massey House, I should say. With this, you can see all the trees. Like, I'd say the estate would have been absolutely beautiful, with the lane coming down to the lodge, which is still there. Kilnagertine is pretty empty, and then the Fairfield would have been here. Also, just on the edge of the map, but not really seen, is the workhouse. And I just want to point out, it's not really connected, but over here is where the burial ground for the workhouse would be, and we'll be able to see that better in another map. This is Brown's Rock as well, and Madam's Well is over here. So the people of Massytown lived through many changes, and the people themselves have changed. For people living in Massytown when it first appeared, life would have been very difficult. From about the 1700s in Ireland, the big house had really taken over as the focal point of communities. The fairs, the mills, and Mount Massey were built, and a community would follow. Your Protestant landlord, like the Masseys, would have rented you out a parcel of land, and you did what you could with it, but not too much. If you made too much improvement to the land or your dwelling, your landlord would up your rent. You lived more or less in a mud hut. So this is a reconstruction done by UCC, and on the right is a picture of one of these huts during the famine. In return for your rent, your landlord was supposed to carry out certain duties. The big house and its domain should provide, and probably would have provided, decent employment for local people, But also your landlord should provide relief and employment in bad times. And did the Masseys do this? I'm not really sure. There's not much evidence to say they did. Perhaps I'm being unfair. The house itself, the Mount Massey house itself, was actually used as an auxiliary workhouse during the famine. So there is an account that talks of Italian fireplaces, fine wallpaper, tall ceilings. But the estate seems to have been troubling at this time, where once they were collecting rents worth 10,000 a year, now they're leasing the house and grounds for just 150 quid a year. And Macroom Union is renting the house later for just £80 a year. Apparently, 500 men were housed in Mount Massey House, despite the grandeur, in absolutely miserable conditions. I can't imagine there was much of a home to come back to. The union themselves, who would have been using the workhouse, or who would have been running the workhouse, had meetings to discuss re-roofing outbuildings, getting slate and glazing. It seems like the house was in a bit of disrepair. I'm also not sure if giving the house over as a workhouse was an altruistic act. Perhaps it was one of necessity, but again, I might be being unfair. The relationship Massey and his tenants would have, though, would definitely have been unfair. The Masseys would have accumulated very good wealth from the arrangement, with their tenants not really getting a good deal. You add this to the stories of the Masseys and their treatment of their tenants, and I believe the people of Massytown, like a lot of people then, lived difficult lives. Landlords most likely used middlemen, like there was a man called James Carnegie or the aforementioned Lucien in the mid-19th century to run their estate, and there are stories of the grabbers and their like that crop up, and these middlemen, who are often Irish, mete out their landlords' harsh terms. Lots are being subdivided more to increase the rents and for the Masseys to eke out every penny from their tenants, and a large economy is being built around the big house and its system. The law is generally on the landlord's side, and there's huge money to be made. In 1841, over 40% of Irish families lived in what was classed as fourth class accommodation, which means it was one room only. And only 7% of the houses had more than 3 rooms. And then the famine hits. And Massytown, along with the rest of the country, is massively changed. Whole families will have been wiped out. If they were lucky, they will have escaped Ireland altogether. Once the famine arrived, the pressure would have been just too much for many people who beforehand were barely surviving under a system that did not support them. And I wonder how many names we lost that were the originals of Massytown and who would have already lived over a century in Massytown. So I'm just going to read a short article that was written in 1847. On the afternoon of Friday last, during the sitting of our relief committee, it was whispered that on the previous evening a woman died in Massytown from starvation. I was requested to ascertain the facts. On my arrival, I found the door ajar and the neighbours most unwilling to approach the house, saying there was a bad fever in it. On going in, a female with 2 rather grown children was crouching near a fireless hearth. Inquiring from her at the hearth if a woman was not dead in the house, she faintly said, "Yes." "Where?" I asked. "There," said she, pointing to a bedstead partially hid from view by an old settle. On looking over this, I discovered a corpse, and, as I fancied, a human being alongside. "There are 2 dead here," I said I, turning to the woman. "No," said a sepulchral voice, "I am not dead yet." This was the husband, Dick Walsh, lying by the side of his wife, the corpse, since the night before. In half an hour after that, mercy which was denied him in this world was, I hope, vouchsafed to him in the next. For 36 hours, not one of this heart-rending group had tasted human food, and when it was supplied to the survivors, exhausted nature seemed to shrink from such a novelty. These creatures crawled still. Next day, in the same street, Dennis Murphy, a weaver, died from hunger. I asked the neighbours how they allowed such a thing. The prophetic answer was, "It will be our own turn next." The tops of leeks had sustained the father and the flock, 4 in number, for some days before. So these are people in Massytown, and I just think it's important to remember what people went through. So this is a later map. This is 1897 to 1913, and if I zoom in, so again, Mount Massey is up here, and the workhouse with the burial ground is here. So you see the workhouse. Sunnyside is here at this stage. This is also a Massytown house, I believe. There's a tannery here, a tannery here. The 2 mills are still here, both listed as corn mills. Excuse me, the fair green up here, so this would be up to Tinker's Hill. If you look at the map as well, like this is, we'll say this would be Mary Ann's, this would be Kelleher's Yard, kind of around here. You can see there's a smithy. So by the later end of the 19th century, I think we would start to recognise Massytown. The mills are still an important focal point, and actually there is an extract from 1887 of how the mill in Macroom is run. So the account tells how the oats would be spread on hot flagstones over a fire, being fed with winnowed hulls by a barefoot boy. 2 men, topless and sweating in the heat, would move the oats back and forth with long spatulas to stop the oats burning and being ruined. There's a description of the men, which I thought was kind of interesting. So one man was red-headed and freckled, the other had crooked eyes. I feel sorry for the poor fellow with crooked eyes, but anyway. The place would be full of smoke and steam, and the men would be drinking from a gallon of water between each round of oats. If you stood them a pint, they would take extra care with your oats. And once roasted, the oats would be taken to the mill proper, where it was shelled and then ground, and you're ready to take it home again. And this is big business in Massytown. It's been going for hundreds of years, and it's still continuing now. So the houses at this point are hopefully no longer mud huts, but are starting to become what we would recognise. Oh, that's the flower that's still going now. Forgot to click on. So hopefully the homes are starting to become what we recognise kind of as Irish cottages. So these would be houses. They're only 1 room deep, and generally at this point only 1 room wide. They would have a large hearth, like an open fire, that was really the centre of the home. They would have a thatch roof. You'd have animals in the house with you. You'd have a sloped floor, hopefully, if you were lucky in the house, for the animals' effluent. They often had a loft, 1 window, 1 door. If rooms were added, it would be like on the long side. You'd go sideways, you wouldn't go deep, if that makes sense. You would absolutely have built the house yourself. You'd have help from your friends and families, but it would not have been built by the Masseys for you. You'd use local materials. You'd often have clay or lime from a lime kiln for mortar. You might have a mix of earth and straw for the walls, and you could actually use your cows to mix the earth and straw together, and you make bricks out of them. You could use stones if you had access, the size of which would be, and the size of the cottage would be determined by how much wood you had to make the roof, which was always thatched. After the famine, in the last quarter of the 19th century, rights for tenants did gradually improve. Between tenants' rights improving and the demise of the Massey landlords, slowly, very slowly, things will have gotten better for people in Massytown. The tenants themselves started to stand up to the Massey and started to refuse to pay extortionate rents. Some tenants, not all, but some, were able to buy their plots. Tenants will also be able to improve their homes and land without rents being put up. Tenants won the successive benefits of fair rents, the right to purchase their holdings from landlords with assistance of state loans, and the Masseys are no longer totally in charge, no longer have this monopoly, and people are able to make their own lives better rather than that of the Masseys. Around this time, late 19th century, the houses might start to have more rooms. By the late 19th century, ranges have started to replace the open hearths, and Massytown, I hope and I think, would have evolved into a little street of homes rather than cabins of 2 or maybe even 3 bay cottages. So this is, if I go on to it, an image of Macroom. It's not Massytown, unfortunately, but this is Cork's, like the Cork side of Macroom. And you can actually see, so this photo is dated 1880 to 1900, and you can see kind of what I think Massytown might have started to look like. So these cottages here, you can see there's like a mix of thatch and I presume slate. You can see they're like 1 story. You can see more of them over here. You can see there's like more windows and doors. It's not just like little cabins anymore, they're proper little cottages. It just to give you an idea of what Massytown would have started to look like by the end of the 19th century. So the closer we get to the 20th century, I really think you'd start to recognise Massytown, and the houses are starting to take on forms you recognise. As the years go by, parlours are being added, or good rooms. There is more of an emphasis on privacy and hygiene, so kitchens are often made a bit smaller and subdivided into private bedrooms. Houses often have their own mini dairies added, and I think people still have the memories of these today. You'd often have a cow or a pig living out back. The kitchen is probably still dirt, maybe flagstone, but timber floors are appearing more often in bedrooms and in good rooms. And with independence comes the splitting of the former Massey estate to the residences. The house and some land is sold, but the rest is split between everyone in Massytown, getting between 2 and 4 acres. Also around the time of independence, it's actually, the name has changed from Massytown to O'Rahilly Street for Michael Joseph O'Rahilly, who died in the GPO in 1916. A lot of street names in the town were changed, but it didn't seem to stick. From the 1930s, houses are becoming more modern again. Thatch is less common, and you're seeing a mix with some houses getting added to or replaced with more substantial buildings. And from the 50s on, indoor bathrooms are being added, and I think we've started to reach the more modern homes we see in Massytown now. The street has continued to evolve and more homes are being added, more estates being opened, but the original Massytown homes of this street along here between the Fairfield and the Mill Dam still exist today and still carry quite a lot of character. So the people in this street are also changing, and they're starting to see families we would recognise. Over 100 years ago, names like Desmond, Leahy, Neville, Walton, Reardon, Kelleher and Collins are really taking hold in the street and showing up year after year. Massytown in the late 19th and 20th century is becoming busy. There's pubs, tanneries, smithies, coopers, carpenters, tailors and shoemakers, often running their businesses from their homes. Massytown is bracketed with pubs. So down at the Mill Dam end even, down here, where am I? Yes. There is, there is Toomey, Reardon and Riley pubs, and Looney's pub, which I think people still remember, is up here at this end by the Fairfield, so literally bracketed with pubs. And there's more along the street itself. There are shops peppered throughout the street. Almost every home has a dual purpose, often with an animal out the back. There are shoe and boot makers like McNamara's, cattle and pig dealers like O'Neill's. There are tanneries, we can see 2 of them here. There's one run by O'Keefe and Hurley, the other is run by Neville's, who had started further up but eventually moved down here to what is now the Tire Centre, I think. There are smithies down here, and this is Forge Lane, so this would be O'Riada's, and there's smithies down here, this was called Forge Lane. And these are run by the likes of Healy's and McCarthy's. The Coopers is run by the Kelleher family, who are still a Massytown family today. It's a vibrant community, and people are making better lives for themselves. And this really continues into the 20th century, with Massytown continuing to have, in a way, its own independence from the rest of Macroom. Somebody said to me it was like Australia, so disconnected in a way from the main town. And somebody tonight told me that they were from the main town themselves and they were sent on their holidays to Massytown. It's amazing. And they know who they are. The fairs every second month bring a large crowd. There's drovers, buyers and sellers who would have lodged in locals' houses, drank in the pubs and brought money with them. Houses actually had to barricade their windows to stop getting cowshed on them and cows kicking windows. The street would be filled with cowpats. Jack Neville founds a hunts club, so sport is quite important to Massytown. Jack Neville founds a hunt club in Massytown in 1882, which continued up until the 1930s. There's a handball alley in Mary Ann's, so that's here, which was called back then Desmond's Alley. Handball is actually so popular in Macroom, it leads to an accident when a temporary gallery built for the crowd of clamouring spectators collapses in 1904. The collapse of the stand is actually remembered in a few lines of poem. One of the patrons from on high did fall, and as he descended that vertical wall, he made a brave effort to land on his feet, and then he realised he had lost his front teeth. Great players of handball at the time include Billy Collins, Pat and Richie Looney, and John Martin. The alley itself became a hold for animals in the fair once the club fell apart, but in more recent years, I think people know it has been resurrected. Coming into the middle of the 20th century is a Massytown that is still remembered today, and it is still very different from the Massytown of today. It's still a busy, vibrant place. The fairs are still happening. So the toll booth is here at the entrance to the Fairfield, so you would pay for what animals you were bringing in to sell. Looney's pub up here, there's nothing there now. Looney's pub is absolutely heaving on fair days, with deals being made and celebrated, and John Looney is ready to cut you in half with his tongue if you were out of order. The rest of the street is also still busy. The tanneries and the smithies have started to disappear. In place of the tannery down here at the Tire Centre, the Nevilles have a large egg exporting business along with poultry and rabbits. Here, I think the most interesting thing, where is seating now for Ó Críodáin, is this was a Jim Rings bar, a 3-story beautiful bar with terrazzo walls and floors. And sorry, I'm actually losing my place. Ó Críodáin itself is called the River Inn, and it does a great chicken supper and a dance. There's less pubs than before, although Looney's is still going. Some of the others have started to disappear. The Nevilles in number 11, down around here, still have a shop, which is now being run by the Críodáins, who also started dairy in their back kitchen, which moves up to Kilnagerteen. Massytown has its own sports day, with cups and trophies being made by Tim Kelleher. The lower half of the Fairfield is used as a sporting ground, and matches are being played by local young fellas in recreations of the matches on All Ireland Day. My own father wins himself a horse in a local fundraiser called Lucky Sixpence, and on St. John's Eve, the 23rd of June, a great bonfire is lit where the Christmas tree is now, and the whole street comes out to have a drink. Children are playing on Brown's Rock out here, or it was called the Slippery Rock, in the meadow behind the houses, passing the greyhound track that would have been here. Following the path further, you'd come to Madam as well. Hopefully, following the path further, you come to Madam as well. There are fierce battles fought in Madam's Well with the kids from Pound Lane over who takes ownership of the place. You know, none of them owned it, but if you were very bold, you'd sneak into Healy's at Madam's Well to steal some apples, or maybe just for the thrill of the hunt from Healy. On New Year's Eve, barrels are being rolled down Massytown, trying to make the most noise possible to ring in the new year, a practice which actually was also done in the town. Massytown itself is full of characters. There's Magula, who always had an open house with a fire going. Noni Cronin with her pampered dogs who get a bar of chocolate once a week. She's also selling a homemade remedy, Dana's Tar, or some people called it the Black Deva, which is a cure for mange. She would curse you if you spoke ill of her dogs. She really was a woman after my own heart. And Crippen found this out, to his detriment, when she apparently made him bald from head to toe for giving out about her dogs. Richie Looney is in his Mark I Cortina, specially adapted for his gut, living with his hounds. Eliza Tuig, one of the last to wear the hooded cloak. Literally every house has a story still waiting to be collected and still waiting to be told. It is still busy, but slowly modernity starts to change Massytown. Businesses like the dairy die off because of outside competitors. Neville's business changes again to a bakery, and it leaves Massytown to bigger premises. Small shops are overtaken by the arrival of supermarkets. The fairs stop, which means less visitors to Massytown, bringing less spending money. The homes do remain, but it becomes more of a suburb of Macroom rather than its own separate entity. There is still a strong sense of community. The mill is still running, June's shop, Mary Ann's pub, and I think there is still great pride to be had in coming from Massytown. Well, I would say that, but yeah. So the final issue is the spelling of Massytown. And we're not going to have any fights. This is going to be kept quite calm, but Massytown doesn't have an E in it. All records of the Masseys themselves favour the spelling with no E, and actually a Massey descendant got in touch with me and confirmed that there's no E. But regardless, the foundation stone of Mount Massey House, this is a horrendous picture and you won't really be able to see it, but you can take my word for it, that the spelling of Massey on this stone is M-A-S-S-Y, and this was placed by Massey Hutchinson and his mother himself, and it has no E. There is no E in Massytown. Okay, so that's the main talk done. One thing we're going to do is I'm going to ask Seosamh Ó Críodáin to come up. And Joseph is my first cousin to my father. I don't know what that makes him to me. I don't know where he is. Oh, he's waiting. Okay. He's also Shanachie, and he recently won awards in the INEC in Killarney for his singing, so I feel like he's going to lead in this song. So normally my family need lots of whiskey to sing this song. We don't have any whiskey, but hopefully they can still join in. So Joe, if you'd like to reach the room.
Before I say we've got to use I think that Marcella deserves a very heartfelt I through this, we did it there behind our house there one evening there, but it was brilliant to see someone so young and so that did a massive pile of work, a massive pile of digging, and really put Massytown on the map. It's never off the map, like, but really it's very, very, very good. We're very indebted to Marcella for your contribution and your presentation here this evening. It's really, really brilliant. I know, it's like John Brown taught us this long ago, and I've been looking to try and find out who wrote the song, so if anyone can tell us who wrote it, I've still yet to find out. John Brown taught us long ago, and I've been searching, and then I got, that was Roman Johnny Tom Gleeson that wrote Bowl Teddy Quill, but definitely it wasn't Johnny Tom. Johnny Tom was not a romantic. Sorry, no, it just doesn't. No, it doesn't suit him at all. And then I was told it was a Kelleher man from Massytown, a Tom Kelleher from Massytown.
And then it was a Ger Kelleher.
And then there was a Ger Kelleher from Massytown, and I was told as late last night it was a Creedon from Massytown. And that was fairly, that was an elderly woman that said it a few years ago that was her uncle or granduncle was a Creedon from Massytown, then wrote it. No, I don't think we were in Massytown at that stage.
No.
We weren't such as, but we might do. Anyway, it's just, and the words change, and the words, and of course everyone around the country knows it, like, you know, because a lot about flowers and things now, and they all know about the more messy the flower Macroom. And I suppose that was over Sean Dunphy recorded back in the 60s. He made a good recording of it, and so that's what it spread like. But they all love it, like, you know, we do sing that thing, like, and I wasn't having it at all, like, I'd forgotten about the shagging thing, like. We'll have a cut off anyway. So we'd all be joining there, where she would all the words up there. I long to remember those bright days of yore, when sweetly with joy I began. The friends who frequented my old cabin o'er, the comrades I loved as a child, how I longed for to roam by Massy's green groves, and approached by the light of the moon, where friends see without be that golden green cloud, and on Massy the flower of Macroom. So friends, come with me, and there you will see the apples and cherries in bloom. And as you I'll invite, where I first saw the light, Mount Massy, the flower of Macroom. In the sweet summertime, and the waisins were fine, what fun there would be at the gate. The music would ring, and the dancers would sing, and the mothers their love tales relate. The pines would smile as they sat on the stile, that facing Mount Massy's domain. And their lovers were fair, standing there by their care, and the music's sweet notes they'd begun. So friends, come with me, and there you will see the apples and cherries in bloom. And as you I'll invite, where I first saw the light, Mount Massy, the flower of Macroom. So now I must roam far away from my home, and cross o'er the wide raging sea, to leave friends behind, both loving and kind, among who dearly love me. Ours may find our way from my home, I will wait the day will come soon, when I stay once again by that lovely domain,
Mount Massey, the flower of Macroom. So friends, come with me, and it's there you will see the apples and cherries in bloom. And it's you I'll invite, where I first saw the light, Mount Massey, the flower of Macroom. Manjo.
We have a few minutes before the tea, so what I thought people might like to do, obviously if there's any questions, we'll ask questions, but also if anybody has any stories or memories of the Massytown they grew up in, or the stories they've heard, if anybody would like to share any of those would be really welcome as well. But also if there's any questions, so if anybody wants to put their hand up and start. Or this might die a death as well. I know some people there in the second row will have loads of stories. No. Oh, sorry, yes.
Just a question there.
Yeah.
I'm into a bit of genealogy, but there was a lad said that there was Baldwin's lived in Mount Massey House, I don't know.
Yeah, so I think that would have been when around the turn of the around the start of the 19th century. Yeah. So when Hutchinson still had the house, it was rented out, and I think there was a Baldwin in the house at that stage before the Masseys arrived. Oh, right. That's my understanding. I could root that out for you somewhere though, but I think so, yeah.
Okay. When did the last of the Masseys actually leave the house?
Yeah, so they sold it. Yeah, and then John himself was in the lodge, the brother was dead, and the son was gone. The sisters were all married off, I think. They're not in Massytown anyway.
That would have been well before independence, would it?
No, it would be very close. So John didn't die until 1931, and I think the house was sold in 1918 to Kelleher's, and then I think it was taken by the auxiliaries, and then it was burnt in 1920. I think those are the dates. Yeah.
My grandaunt who lived in Dublin in the 1950s, she went out to Bray one day on the bus. And when she was coming back, she was standing at the bus stop and she got talking to this woman. And the woman recognised she had a Cork accent and asked her where she was from. She said she was from Macroom. And she said, oh, she said, we're from Macroom too. She said, we're the Masseys, you know. She said, we were the mad Masseys.
I wouldn't like to say it.
That was in the 1950s, so he was maybe still alive at that stage.
So there is a descendant still alive, Patricia, who visited in the 70s. So her grandfather, was William Hugh, who died a bit earlier. He married a Catholic woman. And yeah, I think the sisters and their families, I didn't go into the genealogy past kind of independence because I felt like it wasn't kind of any of my business. But yeah, it seems like they did spread out, but they left Macroom. There was none left in Macroom by 1931. That's lovely that they met on the bus.
Just a little connection there that I had with the lady that was mentioned by you there. She was Liza Toohig.
Yes.
And she was a very gentle, frail old lady. And she used to call to me to the shop over there, you know. And one of the big worries she had in her old age was the development of the telephone. You see, it went from the winding to the button thing, you know. And she was very worried about it because she said she wouldn't be able to press the buttons quick enough to get 1 to 2 to 3, and the line would be gone, you know.
That's amazing.
That's my connection with that old lady.
Yeah, so Eliza, probably one of the last to wear the hooded cloak in Macroom. Yeah, that's lovely. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Denny O'Keefe, and my grandfather came from Massytown, and his father was a tailor, John O'Keefe, who married into the Kelleher's.
God.
So he married a Mary Kate Kelleher, who lived in 52 Massytown, and there's a story about Mary Kate Kelleher during the Troubles. And so in this month, a soldier of the Manchester Regiment was disarmed by a woman and his rifle handed in to the Republican Army. The woman was Mrs. Mary Kate O'Keefe of Massytown Macroom, the wife of a volunteer who, seeing the soldier alone after the curfew patrol had passed, attacked him with a hurley, knocked him out with a blow, and was gone with the rifle before he had time to.
Your relative is a legend. such a great story.
Yeah.
That is brilliant.
That
Yeah.
actually is true, but it has been verified with one of your cousins.
Well, it's in the military record.
I know it, yeah, but they were delighted with it.
That is a great story to have, absolutely. And although this project is finished, I'm still working on collecting as much as I can from Massytown. And I do want to thank the people I've already spoken to who've been super helpful. And for the talk itself, I do want to thank everybody who's given me assistance, because there was quite a lot of ye. In particular, I want to thank Joe and Jerry Cooper, who were really invaluable and who gave me quite a lot of help. But literally everybody who lent me books, who sent me on like down rabbit holes, like people have been so helpful. My friend Denise also lent me a computer, so it's been amazing. So I want to thank everybody for their help. But yeah, I'm still collecting stuff. I'm creating a sheet with all the residents and trying to match up the different years, see where people moved to. You know, the censuses list numbers of the houses that don't really match up with the numbers, so trying to put together something, and I'm hoping to continue that past tonight. So if anybody has anything they want to share, I would love to have it. Yeah.
Just one question, Marcella. Following the burning of Mo Massey House, was there any effort made to rebuild? Was it left as a ruin from then?
Not that I know of. I know the family, the people who bought it, Kellers, I think lived in the stables beside it, but I don't think anybody went into the house itself. I think it was left. But it does sound like it was gutted in the fire, so I think it would have been quite expensive to put it back together. It's quite large. It's definitely
as a country house.
Stunning room. Like when you walk up to it, and the views that has out over Macroom. Like I walked up there recently with a friend again just to see it and to try and get some photos of that bloody stone, and it's like absolutely stunning. And like the lands around it apparently was planted with loads of old trees and was like in what's the word, like a bit like the castle, like just beautifully laid out, but it's gone now.
Was that during the War of Independence or the Civil War?
War of Independence, it was burnt, so it was occupied by auxiliaries, by the Black and Tans, so I think there would have been a bit of resentment. So I think it was burnt in 1920, I think is the year. So hopefully there's going to be tea and coffee because it's 9 o'clock. So it's supposed to be coming. So people are more than welcome to stay around and continue talking about this, or if you want to go, that's absolutely fine too. You're not hostage. But hopefully the castle will be bringing in tea and coffee there, and everybody's more than welcome. And if there's any more anybody wants to talk about or ask about, then I'll still be here. And
can I ask a question before?
Yeah, of course.
I do a bit of reporting with the Cork one, and just looking to find out about Margaret Riordan, who's supposed to be the grandmother of the governor of Massachusetts.
Oh wow.
Who was elected last week.
So there was Riordan's down the mill down
I don't know whether they were Massytown or Macroom or anything, so I just kind of to the assembly.
Elected to the Senate last week, yeah, in America.
There's definitely Riordan's in Massytown anyway, but I personally don't know any more about that. But yeah, it's definitely something to look into.
That was on the paper there yesterday.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
It's about Macroom and
a fellow from Kilgarvan.
Macroom,
Yeah, so there's Riordan's going back a long time.
That was fantastic. It was fantastic.
Take a bow.